Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Kingsglaive, Final Fantasy 15, a Japanese anime film from 2016 that basically acts as a setup of sorts for the related video game that is scheduled for release in a month or so, if it doesn't get delayed again, of course. Now, before I begin my review, I'd like to point out that I am a huge fan of Final Fantasy VII Advent Children from 2005. It was one of the first Japanese anime films that really blew me away in terms of just pure entertainment value, you know what I mean, despite some of the flaws it might have. Now, I plan on doing a review of that movie as well in the near future, but right now we have Kingsglaive to get through. So to start, I think that this movie has kind of an underrated storyline and characters, but it might take a second viewing for you to get all of the relationships between the different characters and regions, because the explanations are delivered very quickly during the opening 20 or so minutes. But I will try to summarize for that for you right now, actually, just to make it a little easier for you to get into the film if you choose to watch it. But again, there's no big spoilers here at all, So as the perennial war between two magical kingdoms drags on, King Regis of Lucis orders Nyx Ulric and the Kingsglaive company of elite warriors to protect the princess of a neighboring region, as well as the realm's capital, from invasion by the vast imperial army of Niflheim. So basically, the film begins with a voiceover kind of explaining the basics here. Niflheim apparently has been a problem for ages because it has been conquering and expanding its rule quite consistently throughout the past few centuries, I believe. Now, Lucis and its neighboring region, Tenebra, I think that's how you pronounce it, Tenebra, had successfully avoided being invaded for quite some time. But Niflheim struck and subjugated Tenebra during a visit by the royal family of Lucis. So, since the royal families of these two kingdoms have been kind of, both good guy kingdoms, we could call them, were meeting up and were together at the same place at once, the bad guy kingdom, so to speak, Niflheim, attacked them to try to kill two birds with one stone. But the leaders of Lucis successfully escaped back to their homeland. But the Tenebra royal family was not so lucky. Okay, so then we fast forward, over a decade later, and all of this is within the first 10-15 minutes. We're thrown into a huge battle, which is pretty sweet. So Lucis at this time is still holding its own against Niflheim. It's providing some resistance against their rule, mostly because it has a magical force field that protects its capital city. But it is incurring losses on the battlefield, and it seems as if the bad guys are going to eventually win the day at some point in the future. So one day, a representative of Niflheim kind of shows up and he says, okay, I'm going to give you a one-sided agreement of peace, you know what I mean? But as a token of well-being, we're going to agree to allow a marriage between the Prince of Lucis and Lunafreya, the former princess of Tenebra before it was conquered. But there are some ulterior motives by all these different parties during the peace agreement. And that's when our lead protagonist, Nyx Ulric, springs into action, with Lunafreya alongside of him. So that's kind of a big mouthful in terms of the plot. There's a lot of kind of setup between the different characters and regions, but I found it to be quite interesting. The story has a bit of complexity to it. It's interesting and moves at a very nice pace, I think. It does not necessarily have, depth of drama in a traditional sense, but you do get a good feel for the main characters. Even a few of the side characters get some color, so that's good too. But what about the action? You know what I mean? What about the action? It's plentiful, it's explosive, entertaining, and slightly more grounded in its physics than Advent Children was. Now, when I say slightly grounded, I mean slightly. As in, it's only highly unrealistic, not excessively unrealistic like Advent Children was. It just felt in this movie like it was a little bit harder for the characters to jump ridiculous heights and it seemed to hurt a bit more when they fell. I don't know, it's just kind of it just seemed to be a little bit, there seemed to be a little bit more weight, so to speak, to the action design and the physics overall. And I think that's a good thing, helps to distinguish it from that last movie. There's also a wide variety of different kinds of action on display, which I really appreciated. You get like fantasy-based battles with gigantic monsters thrown in, some science fiction-based infiltrations with advanced technology, car chases, and some hand-to-hand combat too. So that's something to look forward to in this flick. It has a nice variety of action. And I gotta give this film props for being creative in its world design. It's really nothing new if you're familiar with the Final Fantasy video games, which I only played a few of them, actually. But, I really love the fact that in this movie we get gigantic monsters, futuristic urban cityscapes, magic, historical kind of medieval type concepts littered in, and a lot of like, futuristic urban stuff, as I mentioned before. That urban stuff, that's really what gives it kind of a unique setting. Because really the setting is within this capital city, but you have all these kind of old school type elements like magic and stuff like that involved, which is pretty cool. All of it looks fantastic too, by the way, because the animation quality is just outstanding in this flick. Great attention to detail and use of vivid colors. Lots of eye candy in this one, I guess you could say. Now, I did watch Kingsglaive with the English dub audio, since the characters' mouths were animated to be consistent with the English wording. And thankfully, the voice acting is actually pretty good here. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones, this will amuse you, because we get to hear the voices of Sean Bean and Lena Headey, which was kind of neat. But in general, I really think that Japanese voice actors are way better than English language voice actors in terms of anime voice acting. But Kingsglaive is one of the exceptions to that. I didn't actually watch the Japanese voice acting version because I didn't feel necessarily the need to, given the fact that the English voice acting was good and it matched up with the lip movements. So, just a heads up for you on that one. I have noticed, however, that certain online critics, actually many of them, love to trash these Final Fantasy flicks. Kingsglaive and Advent Children were just lambasted by critics, mostly due to their convoluted or weak storylines and characters. I can somewhat understand that perspective, maybe a little bit more so for Advent Children, which I'll get to in my review. But even with Kingsglaive too a little bit, because there are some gaps in these movies that may require you to fill some things in yourself, using your imagination. For these movies, for me, it does not bother me that much for these flicks, because the story still maintains interest in between those fantastic action scenes. And I would much rather, have that in a movie than a movie that explains every little detail but is boring to watch because there's so much exposition. I mean, there are some exposition dumps in Kingsglaive based on necessity, but, they don't explain every little thing to you. You gotta work some things out, I like that. And, so in summary, Kingsglaive, right? I really enjoyed this flick. And found it to be even more enjoyable during my second viewing, because I watched it a second time. Mostly because I got, more of the details concerning the plot and characters. And this movie is widely available on Blu-ray and DVD, so make sure you check this one out. It's available right now for you. And as always, we'll see you next time.